11. Another explosion tore through the early morning. A car alarm went off. Near the river, a plume of fine smoke shaded the sun's purple-orange prey light. "It's okay, it'll be the army doing a controlled detonation," Michelle said, shrugging as Abby froze, staring into the distance. She shuddered. How could people live like this? How could it go so far that people here, Catholic and Protestant, accepted it as normal? Nodded Erin. She touched Abby's shoulder. "It'll be grand, so. Come on, now." They continued on Rossville Street, towards the gable-end wall, into time-forbidden area. It had seemed like nothing at all when she had walked up Westland Street, a week ago, to spend the night with James. Now it felt like a specter had settled itself over the whole city, hovering over it like a harrier, lingering for prey. "So, James," said Erin, looking at Abby as they walked up the hill. "You just hung out with James because he was English, right?" "What Erin means is," butted in Michelle. "You don't really think he's a ride?" Abby turned to look at her. A ride? Shaggable? She thought back to 3 nights before. Would they have, if the girls hadn't come round? "From what Denise Gillan told Corinne Lane," Michelle continued, "who told Vicky Tranter's sister, who told Vicky, who told her mam, who works at the hospital with my mam, James was getting into the pash with someone on the walls 2 nights ago." She skipped in front of them, then stopped in front of Abby. "Tongues," she mimed, sticking her tongue out and waggling it at her. Abby said nothing, but blushed and glanced down. "Yes," admitted Abby, "I do like him." They walked further on, Erin's house coming into view, all lights on. Then across the street, Abby noticed Michelle's. A group of grown-ups were standing talking to one another across the Mallons' front gate. They noticed the girls, Erin's mum dragging her towards her. "And where were you? Where were you all?" "Out," Michelle said, earning herself a slap round the head from her mother. "Granda said we were to look after her till he and your dad got back," Mrs. Quinn complained to them. "He's not back yet?" asked Erin, eyes wide. Abby felt her legs begin to feel unsteady. She swallowed as Deirdre Mallon held out her hand. "You, girl," she intoned to Abby, opening her hand. "The police have found this. William Street." They all peered down at it. In the dawnlight, Abby could just make out the tan leather band that Fsh had clasped around James's wrist that bright, hot day at the park. "It's James's," Abby admitted, steeling herself not to cry. "I gave it to him." Mrs. Mallon said nothing, but set her mouth thin, as if willing herself not to say something to her. "Your granda's still with Warren Gillan," Mary Quinn said quietly, drawing Erin close, and stroking her hair. "They're still looking for him. You'd better all come back in, I'll get the breakfast." 88,888,888. "I've got all this to learn," James exclaimed, James, pushing his folders and exercise books away. "Risings and rebellions, I just can't tell the difference." "Yes," Abby laughed, then sat next to him. He closed his hand over hers and pulled her close. "I'm so glad you came," James added. "However did you manage it?" It was Saturday. Abby had not gone to Belfast. She had instead, galvanized by her cousin involving her with his weapons cache, put into action her plan. Stella had been disappointed, but Abby had promised her that now she had secured Dean's permission, in that patriarchal way that seemed so prevalent in the society she had been living in for the past 7 months, she could come any Saturday. And she asked her to put their elaborate plan into action. It had cost her. But, being with James was worth it. "Better not tell you. The less people know the better." James kissed her hair, and she leaned up, looking into his pale green eyes. James kissed her nose, then her lips. Abby pressed back. "He kissed so well." Michelle once said, James said, pulling her to him, her cheek finding a comfortable spot on his shoulder, "If I hadn't been so keen on invading, there would be less to learn. I mean, how can anyone think that you or me personally could have anything to do with this? I can't help being born where I was. You can't help being born where you were. By going to the schools we went to was up to our parents. We can't be held responsible for the past." Abby murmured in agreement. "It was the way here. History was living here, a stalemate that neither side refused to back down from and would, if nobody did anything about it, would continue forever. "I can't believe you're here in my room, and you're staying the night," James added. "Where do they think you are?" Abby pulled back a little. "My word, James Maguire, you are persuasive," Abby replied, teasingly, putting a hand to his chest. How could he not even know how lovely he was? He had been so shy when he'd answered the door, almost shocked she had come. "With Stella Donaldson," she said, then recalled, along with the rest of her bottle of Monsoon, her suede album and all the levelers had also been part of the bargain. "Do you want a drink?" he asked. "More tea?" "In a bit," Abby said, then drew him close to her, sitting on his lap. He held her firmly, his hand supporting her back as she put hers to his face. He tasted of tea and mint toothpaste. Abby pressed her lips to his, feeling his firm, urgent response, as he ran his hands down her back, past her waist, then to the roundness of her bum over her jeans. "So, do you have it?" James broke off, looking into her eyes. Abby nodded, the first time that evening her boldness giving way to nervousness. "But, only if you're sure," he added. "You don't have to do anything you don't want to do." Abby shivered, though it was nothing at all to do with the temperature of his room. "I just want everything to be perfect and in the right place," she said. James said nothing, as she sat away from him and he got up, using the dimmer switch, then went over to his stereo. Abby followed him. "Well, are you going to show me what you've got or not?" James pulled her close again. No longer soft and sweet, his kiss was wild, urgent. Abby reached for her bag and then fell to her knees. James closed his eyes, sending a silent prayer heavenwards, imagining perfection. I can't get the wrapper off," said Abby, pulling at it in frustration. "It's like the manufacturers don't want you to get into it." James sank down next to her. "Here, let me try." He took it from her fingers, pulling at the plastic. It gave way under his deft hands. They both looked at it. Neither of them had gone that far with someone before. In a short time they would be moving in rhythm with each other, sometimes slowly, sometimes quickly. It would be heaven. James pulled open the stereo drawer. Abby searched the contents. "Anything you like the look of?" She murmured. "Cranberries, joke." She emptied her bag. "And I've got Nirvana, Mannix." She looked at him, and he touched her face. "We're going to make the best mixtape the world has ever known." James reached for her bag and looked through the mean collection of tapes. "No levelers? I thought you had the latest one." Abby swallowed. "Stella Donaldson has it now, for covering me tonight." James felt his eyes widen. He knew how much her music meant to her. "You didn't." She said. "I needn't, but I wanted to. This being here, tonight, with you it's important to me." She looked down at her hand. "Chesney Hawks?" she asked doubtfully. "Bewitched. Shampoo." James gave her an apologetic smile and took them from her hand, throwing them in the direction of the wastepaper basket. "Probably just Michelle's," he said, smiling at Abby. "Which one do you think we should put on first?" "Zombie," Abby said. "Interesting choice," James replied. "I'll just..." A click noise came from a room downstairs. Abby froze, staring at James, searching his face for answers. "Relax," he laughed. "You look so serious." "They're out," James reassured her. "Auntie Deirdre's on nights, as is Uncle Mike. The girls are around at errands all night for a sleepover." "Okay then," Abby said, her pulse still racing. She picked up the Cranberries tape, and put it into cassette A. James put the blank tape, duly wound onto the beginning of the magnetic section into cassette B. 1, 2, 3, go. At the same time as Abby pressed play, James pressed the record button. Dolores O'Riordan's powerful voice filled the room. "Take that," nodded Abby, as she took out some more of James's tapes. "Well, no one's perfect." A brief look of hurt passed over James's face, but Abby's grin told him it was a joke. "I'm not perfect, either," she added. James bent down to kiss her again, but what interrupted as the song came to an end. "Okay, how about Oasis?" James proposed. "Cigarettes and alcohol?" Once that one was underway, James sat down on the pink flowery carpet of Deirdre Mallon's once spare room carpet. Abby took her dockers off. "Will it ever end, all of this?" Abby said. "Bombing people because of things that happened centuries ago?" "We can be held responsible for the future," James mused. "We can choose to have all this stop." "But how?" asked Abby. "My cousins never listened to me." She reached to her jaw, which, under the 6 layers of Rimmel foundation, was still bruised. "What about your aunt and cousin?" "No." James shook his head, sadly. "I don't think we can, really. And yet, this place Northern Ireland London Derry could just be another British city. It's too big for us to worry about. We can only worry about ourselves." "A-levels, university," Abby said, quietly. "Anywhere. Just to be myself. Make my own decisions." James nodded. "I just want to belong. My family here London My stepdad said I can always go back to live with him, no matter about my mum." Abby nodded. "It's good to be wanted," Abby said, softly. "You are so lucky. You've got family there, here they all want you." James took her hand. Abby liked it when he held her hand. He held it firmly, but gentle, then kissed it, working his way up her arm. He pulled her to him, his arms, too, were soft but secure, as if somehow protecting her. He kissed so well, she never wanted it to stop. She turned and, as she pressed her lips to he combed his fingers gently through her hair, smoothing bits down as he did so. You sure about this?" he asked when they had stopped kissing. Abby leaned into his shoulder. "Sure about what?" Abby giggled. But James's face was clouded, serious. She turned. Then his hand reached for her cheek, almost touching it. His arm was shaking. "Who do that to you?" Abby looked into her lap. "Let's not spoil things." James looked as if he was about to say something else, but then thought better of it. He took her hand. "Are you sure about this?" he repeated. "We can just go as far as you are comfortable with," James said, gallantly, looking into her eyes. "We can go as far as you are comfortable with," Abby told James. "You're not 16 till August." He took her hands. "Whatever will your aunt say?" "Well, she won't find out." Abby laughed. "Except someone will know, and it'll be in someone's conversation. Today tomorrow," she smiled. "Towns like this are like that, with everyone knowing everybody, and everyone's business. Edgeford is like that, like that." "Bromley's not like that," James replied. "No one really speaks to anyone." "So do you mind?" James asked. "I mean, really?" And yet, Abby didn't mind. The bruise that James had touched was just the latest. Her aunt had caught her on her chin. Mrs. Jackson had told Mrs. Gillen that her sister had seen Abby walking towards the Lecky Street with a boy. Abby had denied it, of course, knowing it wasn't James that was the problem, rather, the street. "You may have finished your exams but you will not spend your time straying into enemy territory," Sandra Gillen had chided. "Your mother how on earth did she put up with all your goings-on, I really don't know. Must have the patience of a saint. I thought being in Dean and Denise's company would have improved you." "Improved me?" Abby had raged, silently. "Improved me into aping a boy who plays around with explosives and pretends to be hard, or a stuck-up girl who thinks she's better than everyone else?" So, angered by her aunt's assault, but more so at her suggestion that her cousins ought to be Abby's role models, when James had met her those 2 nights ago and had mentioned he would have the house to himself on Friday night, Abby was determined rather than another disastrous night at the youth club, she would find a way to take him up on his offer, an evening at the Mallons' house with him. Enemy territory indeed. When she had James she had a plan. He had looked shocked, then told her it wasn't safer to walk round Gregan late at night on her way home. What about in the early hours of the morning? Abby had proposed. James had blushed, and had been lost for words, but had managed to reply, "I am sure it would be safe then." "Good," Abby had said, deciding to make James feel more comfortable. "I'll enjoy talking to you indoors for a change. I know you wouldn't take advantage. I'm looking forward to seeing what music you've got." I've made some supper downstairs, James said, breaking into Abby's dreaming. Was he telling her in order to delay the new territory into which they were heading at a rather swift pace, or because he was getting hungry? Do you want to eat now, then? Asked Abby, moving towards the door. James strode over to her and, pulling her close, so his chest was pressed to hers, kissed her. After some medium to heavy petting, strictly over clothes, the lure of supper was beguiling them both. I've done salad, James said. Well, Summerfield did salad. But I cooked the rest. I am sure it will be delicious, Abby smiled, her stomach reminding her that a bite to eat would suit it perfectly just then. She reached for her t-shirt and slipped it on. James reached for his jeans. Then, the sound came again. Or rather, a sound came from downstairs, making them stop. It was unmistakable, the front door lock was being clicked open. Who is it? S.H. James raised a hand, and they both listened. Michelle could be heard, giving it all that, Clyde protesting about something. A look of fear crossed James's face. Abby understood, she would feel exactly the same if she's brought James home to her aunt's house to stay overnight if they were out. Quick! James scrabbled together Abby's bag, jeans, boots, tapes, pushing them underneath his bed. There were footsteps on the stairs. Abby dashed towards the door, the voices wait on the landing. Come on. James hissed, urgently. There was no other place. And the old bastard decides to charge me double. No. Thought Abby, desperately. She dived under the bed as the doorknob of James's room turned. Abby pressed herself against the wall, the valance allowing a little light and movement to be seen. James tried to slip on his trousers, but fell over just as the door flew open. Hey, spasmoid, Michelle Mallon greeted her cousin. Don't you know about knocking? James replied, outraged. I might have had a girl in her with me. Abby put her hands to her face, trying not to laugh. Michelle did her laughing for her. Yeah, right, dickweed. Why are you here? James demanded, looking very cross. This did not deter any of the girls and they made themselves comfortable in the carpet, dropping bags and sleeping bags, pillows and snacks onto the carpet at various places. Erin's granddad decided to invite his friends over to play radios. Couldn't get a bit of peace. Right. Abby saw James glance in her direction. And we knew the house was empty, so I suggested we move the sleepover. To my room? Relax, Michelle said. It was not like you were doing anything. Besides, we have munchies. Sweets, crisps, pop. Yes, right, James said. Go away. Yay, said Michelle flopping down onto the floor, ignoring him completely. Look, we need a place to think about our summer wardrobe, and we have these. She fanned out several magazines, all of them with subtitles like, Is your Aries compatible with his Gemini? Shy Baby? How to Break Free from Blushing, and Win an East 17 t-shirt. James looked around, jeans still in hands. Why have you got no trousers on? Asked Erin, staring at his legs. James held his jeans over his legs. You weren't wanking, were you? Asked Michelle, passing a can of cider over to Orla. Hey. No. Protested James. Michelle sniffed the air. No, she confirmed. But why do you have no trousers on? Not that it was any of your business, I was just getting changed. Any chance I can get changed in my own room, without you all? None, said Michelle, pulling out a tape of Green Day from behind James's stereo table, stared at it, then opened the table drawer and threw it in. Go in my room if you want to get dressed. Why don't you all go to your room? James demanded. 'Cause, idiot, your room's bigger. Michelle rolled her eyes. What is up with you, dickweed? Nothing. But, like you say, it's my room. Well, your room has the 2 double plugs for the electricals. From a head sports bag Michelle pulled out several strange, corded devices. Abby watched as a hair straightener, hair curler, hair beach waves diffuser, brawn curling brush and 2 hair dryers were piled into the middle of the room. They were in for the long haul then, Abby thought. A proper girls' sleepover. James's eyes widened. Nothing's stopping you going, Michelle called over to James as he made a pretense of searching for jogging bottoms from his wardrobe, looming every so often at the ever-growing pile of stuff appearing around the room. "Or stay," she added. "But for God's sake, put some clothes on." Abby looked at his wardrobe door as James used it for modesty, his besocked feet moving up one at a time as he did indeed put something on. Then, she froze. "Since when did you wear Doc Marten boots?" Erin picked up the cherry red boot and looked at it critically. Abby stared, holding her breath. James froze in the act of pulling up his trousers. "They're not mine," he said, closing the wardrobe door. "Well, they are ... I got them from the market, the second-hand stall. But they are too small." "Yug." Michelle knocked it out of Erin's hand. "Nitty Nora's? It's all roughy." She found the other one behind the door and grabbed the one Erin was holding at arm's length. "What were you thinking, dickface? Avio knows all that stuff's got fleas." She then picked her way across the floor, avoiding the makeup and jewelry bags, thrust open the window and hurled Abby's boots into the front garden. "Edge it," Michelle muttered at her cousin, as she returned to her place by the door, then kicked over his beanbag, throwing herself on it, then grabbed her bag. "Come on, ladies," she encouraged. "White lightning." "Hey!" James protested, glancing towards his bed, then looking out of the window. A stray dog was nosing at them with interest. Okay, protested Michelle. "I'll get them back. But you're gonna have to keep them in the shed." "But were they for your creep convention? I guess you'll have to wear them next year, since you took Erin to the prom this year instead." "50s dance," Claire corrected her. "Well, whatever." Michelle rolled her eyes, ignoring James's look of discomfort as he glanced towards Abby again. "Yes," thought Abby, "I did hear." "Pringle?" Claire offered. "Sour cream and chive. New." "No, thank you," said James. "I made dinner, anyway, so." "So that's what's all over Mam's table?" Michelle reached into a bag for some hair rollers. "What?" "Tablecloth ... candles ... roses ... a romantic meal for one." Abby stared at Michelle through the cotton valance, her heart melting. He'd made dinner and gone to all that trouble, for her. "Just thought I'd try something," James muttered, cheeks reddening. "Hey!" he protested, as Orla came through the door, munching on vegetable omelette. "What's all this ... green salad?" yelled James, desperately. Abby closed her eyes, remembering how he had talked about getting enough money to take her out for dinner, and asking what she would have. "Omelette," Abby had said, "with salad." He'd remembered. How wonderful of him. The girls' night progressed as girls' nights do, with hair and makeup, junk food and inane talk. James seemed to have given up evicting them from his room. Instead, he had taken up a position with his back pressed right next to his bed, as if to shield Abby in her hiding place. He had placed a cup of lemonade just under the valance. Abby had wriggled round to it, gratefully, stroking the back of his hand as she did so. Eventually, after 2 a.m., Burno and White Lightning and vodka, and hairstyles and clothes try-ons and problem pages, read out in Michelle's inimitable style, and answered by Orla, Erin, and Claire, that the girls decided that James's room was far too messy to get a proper shakedown and they took their slurping bags into Michelle's room. "You awake?" James hissed, as the Hurls took it in turn in the bathroom. "You can come out now. Are you all right?" Abby pulled herself out, waving towards the bedroom door, which James hurriedly shut, and then she sat next to him, hurrying her head into her knees. James looked at her, not knowing what to do. Was she crying? Was the night ruined? Yes, of course it was. His stupid cousin had ruined it for them. James made to sit tentatively next to Abby and console her, but then he realized that she was not crying, but laughing uncontrollably, her guffaws muffled by her jeans. They sat by the bed, hand in hand, James joining in the laughter, especially when Abby, too, snuck out to use the bathroom. "What now?" James asked, when she'd come back in, and he'd improvised a lock for the door, namely his beanbag and desk chair, which fitted neatly under the handle. "I'd like to have enjoyed the omelette, but I think Orla enjoyed it for me." Abby smiled. "I'm sorry," James began. But Abby put a finger to his lips. "Don't talk," she whispered, looking into his eyes, then leaned into him. He held her close, and he kissed her, making her shiver, his fingers warm on her back. She broke off, glancing at the digital clock on his desk. 3:15. "Too late to go home now," Abby said. "It'd be really sus if I did." She sat down carefully on his bed, kicking over the lemonade glass. She picked it up and James took it from her. "Stella will cover for me." "Right," he said. His face, reflecting in bedimmed roomlight, betrayed concern. "Thank you for dinner," Abby said. I'm sure there'll be another time." Yes, nodded James, keen to please. Keen to keep the conversation going, Abby suspected. "Because I've come to realize you mean a lot to me." She looked at the carpet. "I want to leave here so badly." Tears began to prickle behind her eyes, "and I could have decided to go home weeks ago. Except," she looked at him, hoping James Maguire understood what she was saying, "except for you." And then there were no words, as he leaned her back onto his bed. No words to express her feelings for him, and none from James for her. There was no need. Later, James slipped away from Abby, pacing over to his wardrobe. "What are you doing?" she asked. "You have the bed, I'll sleep on floor," he said, turning to look at her, disheveled and unkempt. "I've got a sleeping bag in here, somewhere." Out of the depths of his wardrobe, James pulled it, eventually. He did a double take as he realized Abby had been watching him fight with a pile of jumpers and battle with shoes that had chosen to tumble out at the bottom. He set it down next to his bed, pulling off his jumper and rolling it up as a pillow. Abby trailed her hand down, finding his shoulder. She shuffled down his bed, until her hand reached his. He held her hand, interlacing his fingers with hers. "Do you really want to leave?" James asked, softly. Abby turned her head towards him in the darkness. "I just want to be out of there," she replied. "You want to go home?" "If I was at home, I wouldn't be here. And here is you." James sighed, happily. They held on to one another until they drifted to sleep. It was just after 5 in the morning, as the sun was considering rising, when Abby crept out of the Mallons' front door. All 4 girls in Michelle's room were sound asleep, the door propped open with a jumble of clothes and bags. She laughed at their positions, James suppressing giggles too. Michelle, sitting on the floor with her hand still on a Pernod bottle, had passed out, her head resting on her duvet. Claire had managed to get herself properly into her sleeping bag and was lying behind the door, her legs underneath Orla's, who was propped against the wall, hoodie hood up around her head, knees bent, as if she had just closed her eyes for a moment. Erin was funniest of the lot. Her head was on Michelle's bed, legs crossed under herself, as if she had been in the middle of trying to get under the covers. "When they tease you about something," whispered Abby, as Erin gave a snortle in her sleep, "remember this." They crept down the staircase, kissing on the doorstep. Abby then tiptoed over the front garden to retrieve her boots, her mind filling with her aunt and uncle being in a bad mood at her coming in so early, and resolved to have a walk around the city walls until she could return at a respectable time. She slipped on her boots, and hurried back to him. "See you tonight?" she asked. "Usual time?" asked James. She nodded. "After my call home," she breathed. They kissed again, Abby breaking off before her will to do the sensible thing of leaving died away. James watched her go, until she was out of sight. And someone else did, too.